Welcome, beloveds, once again into your gathering, worshiping, welcoming, religiously liberal community. I'm thinking this morning of the welcoming words of David Blanchard that begin, "Come down off the ladder, wash out that paintbrush, shake the sand out of your shoes, get up off your muddy knees, and give the garden a morning off." Now, perhaps some of you have actually been on ladders painting indoors. And mercy me, the computer has just done its own it has entered into its own universe this morning and taken me far away from where I was.
We can hear you.
I know you can hear me. That's why I'm telling you all what is happening at the moment and why there is suddenly a break in the words of welcome. And so the words of David Blanchard began, "Come down off the ladder, wash out that paintbrush, shake the sand out of your shoes, get up off your muddy knees, and give the garden a morning off." Now, perhaps some of you have been on ladders painting indoors this week or this morning, but it's more likely that today we call ourselves from the rooms, the tables, the beds, the corners of the house, the shoveling of snow or ice, from the tasks that separate us where we act alone, much needed for some who may be feeling jailed together at this point in the pandemic, and gather onto the couch or together at the table. We gather to be reminded that we are not, in the end nor in the beginning, all alone. Even when we feel abandoned by life and love, we gather to remember our heart's longing to connect, our soul's yearning for love, the love that overarches the frustrations of being cooped up together, a community's possibility to build and forge a larger and wider love, love for this earth, for life itself, for our lives, for the power that can rise from being human together in intentional religious community. We are reminded that our power need not be disrupted at this moment, even as we gather across the unseen superhighway of the internet. Blanchard ends his welcome with these words: "This church is ready for you to create its spirit, to generate its warmth, to kindle its light. This church is ready for you to make community, to create beauty, to bend it toward justice, to serve its ideals. This church is ready for you to be together, honoring your past, invigorating your present, and dreaming your future. This is your church. Here you are home. Here we are whole." Let us begin. This morning, Rita and Rick Rayberg have graciously agreed to light our chalice. If you have a candle or a chalice within your reach that you would like to light, you are welcome to do so when they light theirs. Rick?
We light our chalice this morning with the words of Dag Hammarskjöld. Each morning, we must hold out the chalice of our being to receive, to carry, and to give back.
Thank you. On this Valentine's Day that typically celebrates only one of love's aspects, romance, we gather to notice love's many aspects: friendship, compassion, kindness, hospitality, mercy, justice, and peace. And we ask of ourselves on this day, what does love require of us? Perhaps you can hear an answer and some updated words from the prophet Micah: to do justice and love kindness and walk humbly, whether it be with God, with the holy, the sacred, the source of all, the spirit of life, or divine goodness. Love does not require us to be perfect. It does not require us to get it right all the time. Today, we gather to remind ourselves of the love that is more than personal affection and may not even include affection, but is mercy, compassion, peace, and kindness. To let this love be the guiding star, be our guiding star through this gift of living. New England folk singer Sally Rogers gave us this lively and lovely hymn, Love Will Guide Us. Let us raise our voices while muting our computer sound as Olga leads us in the singing of this prayer.
Abigail, you're talking to mute.
There are many ways in which we live the love that guides us. Today's stories provide a glimpse at the varied ways love guides us. Deborah was unable to be with us this morning, but she graciously recorded the stories for generations.
Narratives are often the most effective way to understand the complexities of our lives. Today we offer a few reflections that illustrate the diverse and powerful force we call love, and the varied ways it is manifest in the world. We begin with a story shared by Reverend Abigail. The story begins in a smaller Unitarian Universalist church where over time the congregation had dwindled to be only a handful of older members and friends. Still, despite their size, they carried their love for one another and for their faith in their hearts. One Sunday, there was a new attendee at the church, a middle-aged blind man. The man was accompanied by another person who had been attending the church for some time. Parts of the service, then as now, were shared as written readings and hymns. This man continued to attend each week, even though he was unable to fully participate, as he was not able to see. One day during coffee hour, he was overheard saying that technology had made life more accessible for those in the blind community. But he lamented that the imprint Braille materials he and others used to read had become less common, and he missed them. He missed, he said, reading with his fingers. Someone else piped up saying that they too missed reading books, the physical books that you could hold in your hand and touch the pages. After that church that day, several people wondered how they might provide Braille hymnals in the church. The congregants did some research and discovered that both Unitarian Universalist hymnals were available in Braille. The individuals worked to raise the funds needed to purchase a set of the Braille hymnals. Even in this small and struggling congregation, they worked to stretch funds. They understood that this was an important way that they would step up to live their values and show their love by being more understanding and inclusive of others. Then one Sunday, the congregation presented the new Braille hymnals as a gift to this new friend. At coffee hour that day, he offered his thanks for the gift and for what it represented to him. For even though he could not see, he was seen. On that day, this small group of people undertook an act of love, of grace, of compassion for a relative stranger who might not even continue to attend their church, but was treated with the respect and care that they would show to any of their members. Our next reflection comes from a time in South Africa, back in the 1990s, when the evil of apartheid finally came to an end, and the people that had suffered easily could have clung to anger and hatred and retribution. Remarkably, there were leaders who led the way of love on the path of reconciliation. The newly formed government offered individuals the respect and dignity to publicly share their stories, and then to extend forgiveness to those who had offered their heartfelt admission of the wrongs of which they were a part. This miraculous example of the power of mercy, forgiveness, and love continues to serve as a reference point for how we all can be in relationship with one another. The Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Nobel Prize winner, Chair of the Elders, and Chair of South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, has written extensively on his faith and the lessons that he gained throughout this experience. In a 2010 interview with Krista Tippett, Desmond Tutu shared the following. I have to say, if you are devoid of hope, then roll over and disappear quietly. Hope says, hey, things can be things will be better because God has intended it to be so, At no point will evil and injustice and oppression and all of the negative things have the last word. And yes, there's no question about the reality of evil and injustice, of suffering. But at the center of this existence is a heart beating with love. You know that you and I and all of us are incredible. We are incredibly remarkable things, as a matter of fact, made for goodness. And it's not just a smart aleck thing to say. It's just a fact. Because all of us, even when we have done wrong, know that the wrong isn't what we should be, isn't who we should be. We are fantastic, I mean, we really are amazing. Our last reflection will be shared by Dennis Duquette.
Excuse me whilst there we go. Uh, so I've had variations of a conversation with each of my children uh, since I thought of it with one of them. The child would say some combination of, "Why are you making me do this? I don't want to do it. You say you want me to be happy, but doing this just doesn't make me happy." And I responded to like one of the children and then have recycled it for the others. I do love you and want you to be happy. Also, the person I'll be when you grow up will love the person you are as an adult. I have a duty both to you now and to the adult you're going to grow into. You have to do this so you'll have learned what you needed to in order to be a happy adult. And subsequently, I also found that this same narrative used internally helps me with my own self-care. I have a duty to the future Dennis that and that helps me do the hard things. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah, and thank you, Dennis, for sharing the story about a parent's love as a guiding star. Let us quietly reflect for the next few minutes on a story or stories in our own experience when love guided us to act or someone else's love guided their actions toward us. Our reflection will be accompanied this morning with this 1908 prize-winning solo piano piece, Mother's Sacrifice, by L. Viola Kinney. Kinney was born around 1890 in Sedalia, Missouri. And after attending college, she returned to Sedalia as a music teacher in the segregated Lincoln High School. We're grateful to Olga for highlighting the music of African-American composers, especially women, who may have only had the opportunity to publish a single piece of music in their lifetimes. Mothers' sacrifices are typically guided by love, the fierce love of a lioness, or perhaps the gentle love of a dove cooing. Mothers sacrifice for their children without any intentionality as they become the physical dwelling for fetus and baby. However, let us not focus only on the females, for earth-centered spiritualities remind us there is some feminine mother in all of us, and therefore it is possible for each of us to relate to mother's sacrifice. Let us enter into a time of reflection and listening. Thank you, Olga, for bringing that beautiful piece to life and for the time to reflect. This is the time we take with each other, the time to open our hearts and share our stories. If you have a story in your heart, please raise your hand or type yes in the chat box and Dennis will call on you.
Thank you. I will also be sharing, looking now for any raised hands, either virtually or analog. Okay, while people are possibly thinking, I will share mine. So Friday escalated quickly. I got a call in the morning that from a recruiter at an agency where I work.
Joys, sorrows, and concerns in our hearts. Singing together, draw the circle wide. Let us join together in the spirit of prayer, spirit of life and love, mother of the universe, father of the seeds of life. Draw us into a wider circle of love. Remind us that the fickleness of our feelings, day to day, hour to hour, minute to minute, are not a reflection of an unending love in which we are all held, and do not need to keep us separate from the heart beating with love at the center of this existence. Open us to forgiveness and letting go as we fumble along life's paths. Massage the muscles of our mourning that our tears water the seeds and roots hidden by grief until a spring of new life blossoms. Knead into our bones the truth that the only power we may truly possess is the power of love, accompanied by its sorrows and joys. Kick us into the end zone of that knowing that we may be its chalice and flame. So may it be. Amen. Shalom. Over 20 years ago, while I was an intern in a clinical pastoral education known as CPE residency program, which is chaplaincy training for ministers. In the early days of this 10-month intense program, my supervisor said to me, "You need to learn about mercy." Mercy, I thought. Did you not read my application? I made Jesus curious, but keep your distant, Wiccan practicing, recently born again feminist for the first time, a Unitarian Universalist. My parents left their ancestral Judaism before I was born and raised me as an evangelical religious humanist in the 1950s and early 60s. Mercy was not part of my upbringing. Mercy was something that white bearded male, my apologies to you male identified beloveds, but that white bearded male judge of bad behavior who needed his own mercy so he didn't smote the entire creation when his feelings were hurt. But me, I don't need to show mercy. I'm a good person. Of course, I know perfectly well how to take my own hurt feelings off into a corner and sulk by myself. In all my growing up years, I don't think I ever heard the word mercy from my parents or my older siblings. Though I could give you a definition and could have given my supervisor a definition sufficient for an SAT exam, I had no real idea what mercy was. And that arrogance alone should have been enough to alert me 20 years ago as I stood before my supervisor, but I was naive and younger than I am now. None of what I said above was spoken aloud in that moment, but it must have shown on my facial expression, because my supervisor suggested that perhaps I should just focus on forgiveness. And heaven knows that was hard enough. Dear Dwayne, here I am 20 years later, still working on mercy. The very first place I went to look after he said that was to look mercy up in our hymnal, Singing the Living Tradition. In my home church, we regularly through the years sang hymn number 93, To Mercy, Pity, Peace, and Love. It's a setting of 3 of the 5 verses of William Blake's poem, The Divine Image. Blake's simple description of mercy was just that it has a human heart. All those years ago, that was not very useful. When I was ordained a few years later and began to serve as a congregational minister, I rarely used this hymn because mercy still evaded me. Now, every hymnal has a topical index, so I did continue my research there, only to find that there was no mercy as a topic in our hymnal. Perhaps we UUs had no need of mercy, as I suspected back then. Of course, there were related topics: compassion, justice and equity, healing and comfort. And within those topic headings, there were some noble and well-known verses on mercy, but none that helped this clueless soul considering this maze of what mercy was, which I was just beginning to enter into. So today, I ask this question and invite all of us to be open to entering a new maze. What does love require of us? And it does have something to do with mercy. And what does William Blake say to us about this in his hymn and poem? It begins with the words, to mercy, pity, peace, and love. Pity in Blake's day had the meaning we now give to compassion and interest and caring and empathy for another's feelings, particularly for another's distress and troubles, and not pity, a feeling sorry for, which carries no empathy and potentially carries some disdain. He goes on to say, to mercy, pity, peace, and love all pray in their distress. We all, especially in moments of distress and trouble and struggle, hope to ground ourselves in the opposite of distress and trouble and struggle. Instead, we wish and hope for love and peace and compassion. And if we have erred, we hope for some mercy. Mercy, like grace in Christianity, is this boost that allows us not to experience the worst, but leaves us with some sense of having hit a jackpot or won a lottery of sorts. Blake's point is that these divine virtues don't reside solely in the divine sphere at some distance from human being, but rather that they reside in us and in our very living. The second verse says, "For mercy has a human heart, and pity a human face, and love the human form divine, and peace the human dress." So what is it that love requires of us? Perhaps it requires us to learn about mercy, compassion, love, and peace. As our stories today highlighted, we can choose to be the love expressed in this world. We can choose to be the mercy of restorative justice, which is the principle underlying the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions. We can be the love and compassion of stopping to take notice of someone else's experience and someone else's needs and stepping up to support them in their achievement. And we can often be the overlooked love that sets boundaries, holds us accountable, and helps us develop the discipline and empathy necessary to participate in life and society as mature enough human beings. One even might frame and understand this past week's political drama of impeachment as an act of love and mercy for an individual as well as for our entire political democracy. An act of naming the boundaries of accountability that love requires us to hold for ourselves and for one another when we forget. Let us listen with our ears and our hearts to mercy, pity, peace, and love. The third verse that is in our hymnal is then, and all must, then every person of every clime that prays in their distress, prays to the human form divine, love, mercy, pity, peace. Let us be graced with Olga's performance of this lovely hymn this morning.
To mercy, pity, peace, and love all pray in their distress, and to those virtues of delight return their thankfulness, return their thankfulness.
Thank you, Olga, and thank you, Pam. For those of you who are on the phone, the hymn was accompanied by photos of the various activities of love that your congregation has offered to one another, to your larger community, and to the world over the years. It was very moving. Thank you. I think that my response 20 years ago about mercy held some piece that is true and often hard for us liberal religious sorts to express our faith in the inherent worth and dignity of all people. And this is that how often we see mercy, which is a lessening of possible punishments for our crimes, and grace, which is an ease through something difficult, an unexpected leg up or gift that moves us toward a goal. How often these are expressed in traditional religious language that describes us as undeserving. And it is hard for us to reconcile that with our ideal of the inherent worth and dignity of all privilege, of all people. But I think it also speaks to something much more difficult in us, our privilege, our education, our place in this culture, our social standing, because we do all have social standing, whether we want to or not. And it often, those pieces leave us assuming that we are worthy and perhaps even always deserving of both grace and mercy. Don't misunderstand me. We are worthy of grace and mercy, but so is every other human, even the ones who have committed horrific crimes against others, even the ones whose religious or political beliefs we so vehemently disagree with. And this is truly difficult. To tell you the truth, I don't always get it. But I hope that I have more years to learn into the meaning of mercy. Amazed, my CPE supervisor more than 20 years ago set me onto and into, and I wander still. The other problem that I think we've faced by turning away from that religious language of undeserving around the concepts of mercy and grace also seems relevant in these days when we've been invited to struggle with the structural racism in this culture in which we live and breathe. Much that we claim as grace, we see as having pulled ourselves up by our own bootstraps. We may not do this so much in words, as we have learned that one really can't pull oneself up by bootstraps, at least intellectually we've learned it. But it may be belief we don't even notice within ourselves because we have been taught not to think of ourselves as pulling ourselves up by our own bootstraps. And yet the belief may sit deeply in us and in our bodies. And the problem with mercy that I expect all these years later my supervisor was alluding to is that in the midst of this, we also often have little mercy for our own human frailty. In a culture that privileged perfection as the gold standard to which we must measure up, true mercy for ourselves is difficult to attain. For in order to experience mercy, we must acknowledge the depth of our true acts of injustice, and at the same time learn to dismiss and let go the internal punishments we mete out to ourselves when we have been less than perfect. What I could not see 20 years ago, but am beginning to be able to see today, was that any mercy I offered to others in prayer in my hospice work at the end of their lives probably really wasn't mercy. It was instead just a kind of verbiage to make them feel better. It was a nod to mercy, but I didn't understand mercy, so how could I really offer it? I failed to understand the undeserving aspect. A nod, however, is a good place to begin because there's always some truth to that old saw, fake it till you make it. If we begin with a nod, we walk through the door into a maze to learn what love requires of us. Then perhaps we find our willingness to learn more deeply, more intentionally, the true power of love that is mercy and compassion and kindness. A love that is the foundation of a deep peace in our own hearts and souls that others experience when connecting with us. A love that is mercy, a lessening of our critical, withering judgments about impossible standards, and an intentional learning about the systematically racist standards of which, for those of us whose identity is white, we have been so carefully taught not to see or notice those racist standards, but bring them about in our beliefs, sometimes about punishments and crimes of others. I probably began to do my deepest learning about mercy through almost 10 years of sitting and working on a restorative justice panel. I noticed that as I read through the cases before we met with offenders and victims, I had a clear judgment about who was right and wrong. And then we would sit down at this round table, always with the offender, sometimes with the victim. Our job in restorative justice was to first allow the offender to tell their story in a setting where there was no possibility of legal punishment. As I listened over the years, I learned to hear the deeper story after 2 or 3 hours of being together over the course of 3 months. We learned more about our offenders and their own understanding of the literal crime they committed. Another aspect of the restorative justice work was to guide them toward a fuller accountability for their actions and the feelings that precipitated those actions. We all noticed often that their first impulse towards personal accountability came from a shame so deep that they would blot out their own strengths and positive qualities alongside accepting accountability. So it was also part of our work to help them see their gifts and their strengths, to move beyond just their shame into the grace of knowing their gifts. So part of our work was to guide them into mercy for themselves and to offer mercy while still holding them accountable for the crimes committed. What does love require of us? It requires us to do the very difficult work of becoming aware of our own principles and values, the ones we want to measure our own lives by. It requires that we let go of trying to make others live up to our principles, but just do the work of helping ourselves do that better each day. It requires us to spend time acting and reflecting on the values. Perhaps that is a gift from this pandemic time, most especially to those harried in this time with minimum wage earnings, children suddenly being at home all the time, and little access to control over the circumstances that are shaping their lives. What does love require of you today? Mercy for yourself, first of all, a reckoning of wrongs and lessening of punishment and guilt. Does it require some grace for the frailties of frustration and confinement that afflict all of us these days? Love is a power. Perhaps love requires us to take up this power and use it well, to dedicate ourselves to unlocking its power, committing ourselves to move no matter how slowly, each at our own pace, from greed to giving, to loving ourselves enough to move beyond barriers and fear, daring to learn love's power within, among, between, and beyond. So may it be. Let us sing loudly with our computers muted, a prayer of answering the call of love as we hear it in our lives.
And so every soul from
Thank you, Olga, and thank you, everyone. Let us go forth yet again with these words from Anne Hillman. We look with uncertainty beyond the old choices for clear-cut answers to a softer, more permeable aliveness, which is every moment at the brink of death. For something new is being born in us if we but let it. We stand at a new doorway, awaiting that which comes, daring to be human creatures, vulnerable to the beauty of existence, learning to love. I'm Reverend Abigail Stockman, and I'm serving First Parish as your sabbatical minister for worship, while your beloved Reverend Linda Sutherland is on sabbatical from her congregational duties.